What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Mafia Podcast, NBA edition. We are rolling along with our mini series where we are breaking down a draft prospect, just one in each episode. Today, we'll be talking about Tyrell Terry, more of a lesser known prospect, I would say, overall. So I'm looking forward to talking about him a little bit. Jordan Jika, aka Dr. Fantasy, here with my co host, as always, the wonderful Fantasy Caveman. You get a wonderful today. So,
Awesome.
um, this is a guy, and we were laughing a little bit before we started. But honestly, I saw him in a few mock drafts, and I had never heard of this name before. It didn't ring a bell to me. I mean, I guess I did not watch a lot of Stanford basketball this year is the reality. So I'm looking forward to talking about this one though a little bit after watching him and really breaking down his skill set. So Tyrell Terry, 6'3", 160 pounds. Yes, I am saying that properly. He's listed as 160 pounds right now, which when you see this highlight video is not going to surprise you because he looks very scrawny. But a freshman from Stanford, averaged 14.6 points, 4.5 rebounds, 3.2 assists, shot 40.8% from three-point land with a heavy volume. So overall, very solid freshman season. I think a lot of people, and one of the reasons he personally wasn't on my radar is I think a lot of people were surprised that he came out. He definitely could use a little more seasoning. So I think that's one of the reasons. This was just a surprise name that snuck up there in the draft, but based on his potential and based on the weakness in this class, he's really been flying up draft boards. So we'll kick it off with the strengths here. K for Tyrell Terry's strengths.
All right. First of all, and this is gonna be mentioned quite a bit in this episode. I feel he is, in my opinion, the second best shooter in this draft class, behind Neesmith. I think he is the second best shooter in this class. I love his form is just flawless, and it's like silky smooth, and he shot almost 41% from three, so good 3-point percentage. Another thing, and we talked about this in our last. I kind of talked about this in our last episode when we did Trey Jones, but Tyrell Terry has an insanely high basketball IQ on both ends of the floor. And especially for being his size, which I'm sure we'll talk about when it comes to the weaknesses. Because in my opinion, that might be one of his only ones. But he has a very quick change of direction. He does a solid job of losing guys when and getting to where he wants to get to. But yeah, and the fact that he's undersized, but yet he perfected like the little floaters and the little inside moves that kind of get his shot off against bigger guys. He kind of mastered some moves down there to get it done. So very impressive, especially on the offensive end.
Yeah, and I mean, really, when you're talking about his strengths, it's all offensively. I mean, when you talk about generic terms that you use for a player like this, sharpshooter comes to mind because that's what he is. I mean, he throws up shots. He throws up all different kinds of shots. You mentioned it. It's not like he's completely one-dimensional in being a great three-point shooter. He gets very creative, and he's just very advanced offensively for a player that was only a freshman last season. And I think that's the first thing that you notice about him. And another thing that's impressive with him, we talk a lot about these shooters having poor shot selection at a young age, but I mean he really doesn't take bad shots. He's high volume, high efficiency, and I think his shot selection as a whole, in my opinion, is pretty solid. And you can kind of tell that by his percentages last season that he doesn't take terrible shots. As a guard, he does have great court vision. He's not really a pass first. We talked a lot about Trey Jones being more of a floor general. Tyrell Terry is a scoring first mentality has a scoring first mentality as a point guard, but he does have great court vision. His free throw percentage, I didn't really even mention with his shooting. He shot 89%
Yeah,
from the free throw line last year. I mean, you have to include that in his strength. That's really
that's
impressive, 89%. So I definitely have to throw that in there. And then the last thing that I wanted to say is even though he's undersized, and as you said, we'll talk about that more, he's kind of tough for being so small.
oh
I mean,
yeah,
you wouldn't
for sure.
expect a guy that's 160 pounds to average 4.5 rebounds. I know 4.5 rebounds isn't anything eye-popping, but that's pretty significant for a scoring guard that's only 160 pounds. That's impressive. So even though doesn't have great size, if he's able to add to that frame, I think he would be a really good rebounder because he already shows at his size that he's willing to go in there and fight for rebounds. So you got to give it to him, even though that he's scrawny. He fights for rebounds, and I can definitely appreciate that. And when you have an attitude like that, you know that he's a tough-minded guy that's willing to go the extra mile to fight for, a hustle guy. He would hustle, and you really don't see that all too often with these guys that seem to just be chucking up three-pointers. So he's got a good mix of being tough, but also being a scorer, which I think is kind of unusual. So I think that's all that I have for his strengths. So what do you have for his weaknesses? I know we've kind of alluded to the biggest one about 20 times already. So
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of did. I mean, it's his size. He's very. The rumor has it that he's working on putting on a little bit more weight and mass, which is essential for him. He needs to. You really think about it last year. No one, and I think I didn't see like an exact number or stat, but there was no one that played significant minutes that was under 170 pounds.
yeah, I doubt it.
So he if he stays at 160 and he doesn't continue to build out his frame or gain a little more mass, then it's going to be really tough sledding for him in the NBA. Another thing is that you watch him, like you see with a lot of these highlights, he can get to the basket and get where he wants to do, but he really relies more on like craftiness and stuff like that versus speed. He doesn't really have breakaway speed.
No.
And that's kind of big thing. You see guys like him. A lot of the guys like him have that breakaway speed to help get them, but he doesn't have that. He just relies more on finesse and craftiness to get to the bin, which has worked for him up until this point, but questionable whether that would work at the next level. And finally, before I take it over to see what you have for his weaknesses, his assist to turnover ratio was not good. So he averaged 3.2 assists, but had 2.6 turnovers.
Yep.
So that's kind of he needs to improve that at the next level for sure. You're not gonna make it in the NBA very long with those kind of numbers. So he's gonna have to cut down on the turnovers.
Yep. Yeah, and the top three that I had, which I pretty much agree with you. Obviously, he needs to add some muscle. He's very small. He would get absolutely demolished in the
Yeah,
NBA if he stayed at this size. So, because I mean, I'd call him a little more of a project. I wouldn't expect him to step in day one and be a superstar. You may see him as a role player for a few years before he really takes that next step forward. Um, and kind of along those lines with the size, we haven't talked too much about his defense, but he's not a great defender. I
no,
mean, and you can imagine why at that size. And we talk a lot about versatility in terms of being able to defend multiple positions. And Tyrell Terry is not going to do that with his combination of athleticism and size. And he shows a willingness to defend, but he doesn't have. It's kind of weird because it seems like he has a very high offensive IQ, but he's not always in the right position defensively. And I mentioned before, he's got that tough mindset that I think is really going to benefit him. So long term, I think he'll be a better defender because I think he's willing to, but maybe he just needs to be coached up on the fundamentals a little more. But as of right now, as a whole, he's not the strongest defender. So,
Yeah.
when we're talking about his strengths, it's all offensive. We didn't mention one piece of his defensive game, realistically. So, and I also had that his assist to turnover ratio is pretty bad. I usually look at that, especially with younger guards. What that tells me is maybe he's better service playing off the ball instead of being a team's primary ball handler. But at the same time, defensively, that leaves you a huge gap because you really can't defend guys that are playing the 2 and the 3 position in today's NBA. So if he wants to play point guard long term and be a primary ball handler, I definitely think he's going to have to improve upon that, which he definitely can. But it's definitely a big flaw in his offensive game right now.
Yep.
So let's talk about some NBA comparisons. You said there's an obvious one, and I really want to hear what the obvious one is here.
Okay, so obviously this is his ceiling, and it's a very, very high ceiling. That's Steph Curry.
Okay.
And I feel like that's what you were expecting me to say.
It was.
But you just come on, look at him, look at his shot, look at how he moves on the court. Look at he just takes the shot and just makes it. You watch these highlights, these are shots that Steph Curry takes. And obviously, and he's also very undersized, much like Steph. Steph is not as bad as people think he is on the defensive end. He's just very small, and he gets picked on because of it. And that's even if Tyrell Terry lives up to his potential, he's still going to be a liability on the defensive end, which might not matter that much if he gets to Steph Curry level, which I mean, that's a lot of pressure to put on a guy to say he'll reach Steph Curry level, but that realistically, his ceiling is that. Now, in terms of a couple other ones I had, and Seth Curry, Curry's younger brother, that kind of might be. I think that's pretty close to his floor. Just like a Walmart version of Steph Curry.
Ouch! Walmart version of Steph Curry.
So which still isn't that bad if you think about it. And then a couple more names before I throw it over to you to see if you have any more. And I think you look at him, he kind of looks like a smaller version of Tyler Herro. I don't know if you see that, but I just think, like, maybe I'm just thinking from a shooting perspective, and Tyler Herro can straight up shoot the ball. But I see kind of shades of Tyler Herro in Trey Jones. What do you think? Terry, not Trey Jones.
Trey Jones. Oh my gosh! Now we're going backwards. Here we go.
We're going backwards.
There's two names that came to me as soon as I started watching him. One was Steph Curry. I don't see the ball handling skills that Steph Curry had, but honestly, when you look at Steph Curry as a freshman at Davidson, he was this size too. The only difference between Steph Curry and Tyrell Terry at this stage in their careers is that Steph Curry stayed until he was a junior at Davidson. So I wouldn't be surprised if you saw Tyrell Terry's draft stock shoot up even further if he was to stay 2 more years. So I really think that's a difference. When you look at their stats, Steph Curry, really the only difference, a lot of their percentages, free throw and 3-point percentages were exactly the same as freshmen. So there's a nice comparison there. Steph Curry averaged a lot more points, but Davidson also relied on him a lot more. I mean, he was that offense. Stanford was a top 10 team in the country at one point. So, I mean, this is a well-rounded team that didn't just rely on Tyrell Terry. So, I mean, if he was in a situation where he was the offense, I think that he could have done it similar to what Steph did. So, I mean, it's just even the shooting stroke, I mean, it's just kind of uncanny. He's got that quick release. that you see Steph have, and some of the, in this highlight film I've even seen a few times, he took shots that were kind of in between the half court and the 3-point line, just
Steph
chucking
Curry
right
shot.
there,
He's
right
taking
there. He
Steph
just
Curry. Yep.
a really
Steph
long
Curry thing.
shot. I mean, it's kind of, I think you're going to start seeing this a lot, especially with this generation of basketball players, because Steph Curry's had a huge influence. So I expect more guys like this to come out over the next few years. But so number one, I thought of Steph Curry. Number two, actually, I didn't think you were going to say Tyler Hero, but I agree. Actually, that was the second name. Those were the first two as soon as I saw them. And that's usually how I do my comparisons. I watch them for a few minutes, and usually there's a few names that just come to my mind, like, okay, based on what I've seen, this is who they remind me of. And he was one of them. I really liked Tyler Hero at Kentucky. I'm a big fan of his now, and I think he's going to be a superstar player. And I'm not going to lie, looking at his college stats were freaky. He averaged 14 points, almost exactly the same as Tyrell Terry. He averaged 2.5 assists. Does that sound familiar? And he averaged 4.5 rebounds as a freshman at Kentucky. Also, does that sound familiar? It's almost exactly the same as Tyrell Terry. So that kind of was freaky. I didn't even, know that when I first thought of Tyler Hero, but their similarities as freshmen were kind of uncanny. So I really liked that comparison as well. So that's a two that I had. When I did some research to see what other people thought, I saw a lot of Trae Youngs. I can see
I can
what
see
they
it.
mean by Trae Young. Trae Young's a little more of a playmaker. You saw his assist numbers were much higher. So I don't love the comparison. I mean, I
I can
definitely
see
get
it.
it as an undersized guard. I don't think it's a bad comparison. I definitely think it's pretty solid. There's some maybe small differences, so I'll throw Trae Young in there as well. And it seems like a lot of praise. We're going with Trae Young, Steph Curry. I'd say Tyler Hero right now is maybe not the biggest praise. I think in a few years that's going to be huge praise, but I agree that maybe on the lower end, Seth Curry is more realistic, and that's not bad. I mean, Seth Curry's carved himself out a nice role player role several teams now, so that's not a bad comparison either. But this is the kind of guy I definitely think he's going to take a few years. I mean, Steph Curry was the same way. People used to question how long Steph Curry was going to last in the NBA because of his injury. So I think it'll take a few years for Tyrell Terry to develop, but I definitely think he has some of the most upside in this entire class. So
Mhm.
let's finish it up here with the ideal fit. Let's hear what you have for this one, Caveman.
All right. Now I have several ones here because I couldn't decide, so I just put them all. Uh, First one, the Orlando Magic. I mean, you look at their situation scoring wise. Specifically, they don't have anybody that can hit a consistent 3-point shot. Uh, mm, Evan Evan Fournier is probably their best 3-point option, but I don't like that at all. So you put Tyrell Terry in Orlando, and have him just shoot. They still have, and you brought this up earlier. He's interesting because I agree with you that he might be better suited off the ball, but he doesn't have the size to do that.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting. But I think he could still run point. I think he has more upside at this point in his career than Markel Fultz does. So, and then another team, and you mentioned this guy in the last this team in the last episode, and that's the Boston Celtics. Another team, reality is, even if they don't trade Kemba, I don't think Kemba's in their long-term plans. Wanamaker's a free agent. So what you can do if Kemba's back this year, he can take some time to kind of build out his frame and improve improve on the defensive end playing for Boston there. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I actually struggled a little bit with this one. So I kind of went back and forth a few times, but I actually settled on the Magic as well because I think example of a team. They need high upside players. I mean, I don't think this is a team that can really afford to say, okay, we're going to take a guy like your boy Josh Green, who's probably a pretty safe bet to be just a solid role player 3-and-D guy. This is a Magic team that really just needs talent. I mean, they're rebuilding, and I remember in that episode saying one of their biggest issues was that they needed star power. And I'm not saying that Tyrell Terry's absolutely going to be a star, but I think they need. I remember mentioning Cole Anthony for them, and I think this is a team that needs to take a chance on a boomer bust prospect. I mean, that's where they are right now. Otherwise, they're just going to be a borderline playoff team for the rest of eternity. So I think a team like that needs to take a risk should go after him. I've seen him go quite a few times, number 12 to the Kings. And the Magic have the 15th pick, by the way, so very possible that he'll be there. But he's one of those guys so I was starting to think, okay, if he has that much upside, what kind of teams would be willing to take a chance on him, potentially even in the top 10? Because that's where we are in this draft, is I feel like we're all just guessing. We don't even know who's going number 1 at this point. Everybody's assuming Anthony Edwards, but I mean, I wouldn't say that.
You won't know until they announce it on draft night.
Yeah, I mean, and very rarely does that happen. I think a lot of times we kind of know who it's going to be. I mean, there's usually a clear-cut number 1 prospect. This year, I don't really think there is. So, I could see him sneaking into the top 10. And I know you're not going to like this, but I could see him going to a team like the Knicks. I mean, that's another team that really just needs high-level talent. So if he was going to sneak into the top 10, I think that's probably where he would go, in my opinion. So I'll throw the Knicks in there just because I do think they need this high upside talent. So, but I think the Magic makes the most sense just based on him being 15th overall. And by the way, I have an interview up on my computer with Tyrell Terry right now, and he said he modeled his game after Steph Curry. Just as a side note, but playing in the background, I did stop sharing my screen, but interviewing him on an ESPN interview, and he just said I try to play like Steph Curry.
I'm shocked.
So very surprising there. So I think he's interesting, though. He's one of those guys where we talk about this class being unexciting, but when you really start to break, that's why I like doing individual breakdowns when we did the team breakdowns and when we do these individual prospect breakdowns. You just start to notice some potential that maybe you didn't see before. So I think that's a great example here is 5 months ago when we started the series, we would have never considered doing an individual.
We didn't know he existed by
Tyrell Terry, And I've seen Stanford games, but I think I usually draw my attention towards guys that I expect to be top picks. I'm paying closer attention to them. So I've never heard of him as a top prospect. So, but I honestly, this might be crazy, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was the top player from this class. I mean, I think it's definitely possible. Or you may never hear from him again. I mean, that's how boomer bust some of these prospects are. But based on today's game and how important shooting is, I think he'll carve out some sort of role just based on his shooting ability alone. So, anything else? Any final thoughts there?
No, I think he'll be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So this one went over a little longer than we wanted to again. So we appreciate you guys for watching and listening. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube to get all of our future content. You can also subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, so keep an eye out for that. But we have more that we're going to be doing right up until the NBA draft, so make sure you check that out, and we will see you guys next time.
Yep.